Jaylen Johnson's contract demands have gone up, and rightfully so. But his latest comments about the ongoing negotiations tell me that the franchise tag is the most likely outcome in the short term.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including YouTube, where you can find our YouTube channel and all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. On the show today, we look at the latest in the Jaylen Johnson situation, some new comments from his appearance on Jaylon Johnson's podcast that kind of set the stage for how these negotiations are going to go. We'll look at how his stance and his demands have changed over the course of this season and the gamble that Ryan Poles played in all of that, and why where things stand now really makes the franchise tag look like the most likely of the immediate outcomes as we get closer and closer to the start of the new league year. But I also want to look at what could happen from there. Does that lead to a long-term contract extension? Do they let him play the year out on the franchise tag? Or is there still a possibility that a franchise tag leads to a potential trade if a long-term deal can't get worked out and that relationship, deteriorates, kind of like we've seen it fluctuate back and forth up to this point? But I really want to make sure we set the stage here for where things have come and gone for Jaylen Johnson, because since last offseason to now, things have changed quite a bit. The Bears have changed quite a bit. I mean, same coaching staff, same general manager, but the roster has changed quite a bit. The state of the team has changed quite a bit. Some of the younger players we've seen more of. And also, Jaylen Johnson just had his best season of his NFL career and finished it off pretty darn strong down the stretch, albeit missing the final game of the season with an injury there. So I want to go back first to the trade deadline this past season. You remember Jaylen Johnson requested and was granted permission to seek a trade and went out and seemed to apparently talk to other teams. Ultimately, no deal was reached, obviously, but it was a sense for he and his agent to be able to gauge the market a little bit out there and see what might be available, what other teams might be willing to pay for Jaylen Johnson's services. And I remember at the time, he said essentially that, what he was hearing from other teams was more in line with what he valued himself as and not quite as in line with what Ryan Poles was valuing him at. But at the same time, it's easy for teams to say on the trade market, we value you at this, but until they actually sign the dotted line on the contract, slightly separate story, until those negotiations actually start there. But specifically, I want to go back to what Jaylen Johnson said at the time.
I don't take any of it personal at the end of the day, and two, also, I'm not going to take back on who I know I am and what I feel like I am worth. And it's I'm not asking to just change the market or break records. I'm not asking for that. But I'm also not going to just take anything and, you just deem me as this, so I'm this. I'm not. I don't just take one man's word and just put that viewpoint on myself at the same time. So, it's a balance of being professional, being respectful to what his goals are and what he's trying to do, and also what my goals are and what I'm trying to do.
That was then. This is now. He goes on Jaylon Johnson's podcast. I believe it's called All Facts, No Breaks with Jaylon Johnson. And he said, quote, "I think the ball is in my court. The ball is in my favor. Really, I think it's just a matter of time when it happens. But I think really going into the negotiation, I don't think it's too much to talk about, really. I feel like there's no reason I can't be the highest paid corner in the league. I feel like that's what I'm aiming for. That's what I'm shooting for. That's what I think can be done and should be done. I feel like I've had a good enough resume from my rookie year until now. I feel like really this was just the icing on the cake. I feel like there's not anything anybody can say. I took the ball away. I got all pro. I got Pro Bowl. I mean, what else is there for me to get? I feel like I'm very deserving of the highest paid at the position. I'm going to go in, and the ball is really in my court. I'm just going to wait for them and come to terms on it, and hopefully it's what I feel I'm deserving of. That's the full quote there from Jaylon Johnson. I can't play the audio because we don't have rights to, Fox Sports' podcast there, but very different tone of like, I feel like I deserve this and I should be the highest paid player, highest paid corner in the NFL, compared to I deserve to be paid, but I don't need to break the record or, reset the market or anything. Now it's more like, no, I need to reset the market. I need to be paid. And I think that's valid. I mean, he goes out and has an all-pro season, the best season of his career, statistically the best cornerback in the NFL, lowest passer rating when targeted, highest PFF grade overall and in coverage. I know any of those individually are not perfect stats, and you can certainly make an argument over was he the number one corner in the NFL? Was he number two? Was he number three? But like top three cornerback in the NFL this season, played at an extremely high level. And this was ultimately the risk that Ryan Poles ran. This was part of the calculus entering this season when throughout the offseason there were negotiations with Jaylon Johnson. The two sides couldn't really reach a spot, and the Bears said, listen, essentially, they said, we're not ready to pay you like a top cornerback yet until we see you perform like a top cornerback yet. So, go out there and play at a high level, and then we can maybe meet closer to where your valuation is, but we still need to see it. And then from the Bears' perspective, it's like, we're not going to pay you for that production until we see that production. Like, we think you can be a better player than you even are, and we're happy with where you are, but like, we're not going to pay for that until like we actually physically see you do it. Now they have physically seen him do it. Now we've seen, okay, yes, that is the Jaylon Johnson we thought he was capable of. That was the Jaylon Johnson putting it all together and largely dominating for a majority of this season and looking like a guy who deserves to be paid like a number one cornerback and like perhaps the highest paid cornerback in the NFL. The tricky part here is that this idea of highest paid cornerback in the NFL can actually mean a few different things. And it's not as simple as just what the average annual salary gets out to. And Ryan Poles and Jaylon Johnson might have different ideas over what they value in terms of the structure of the contract and how they can make him the highest paid cornerback and still fit in parameters that the Bears might like here. And all of it starts to point to where I feel like, given how the negotiations have gone up to this point, that a franchise tag feels like the most likely outcome. We'll explain why and some of the different trickiness of Jaylon Johnson's situation and also just contract negotiating in the NFL in general next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy to help you be your best in your brain. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. And it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. I think about, sometimes it's small things that don't end up carrying a lot of weight, but can stick with you for a while. Like maybe like a Jaylon Johnson trying to let it out that he deserves to be paid and in the past has felt not properly valued by this organization, and being able to express that and put them out there can be a really important part of that process. And sometimes it's even bigger problems, more important than our favorite sports teams. And so therapy can be a little bit different for everyone. And it's important to get these kind of things off your chest every once in a while. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So Jaylon Johnson wants to be the highest paid cornerback in the NFL next season. But what does that mean? Specifically, like, what does that mean to him, right? Because highest paid can mean a few different things. If you look at like cornerback salaries and cornerback contract, you talk about them a lot here on the podcast. We always reference overthecap.com tends to be where we go for the numbers. And you've got, okay, right now, the highest paid cornerback in the NFL per year is Jaire Alexander of the Green Bay Packers, getting an average of $21 million a year. He signed a 4-year, $84 million contract. So $21 million a year is the average, is the highest salary, right? Game checks that a player is getting year after year. But technically, Denzel Ward of the Cleveland Browns is the highest paid in terms of like total value because he got a 5-year deal worth $100.5 million. So he's making slightly less per year, $20 million versus $21 million, but he's getting more total money and more specifically, more total guaranteed money. He has the most guaranteed money of any cornerback contract in the NFL at $71.25 million. Whereas Jaire Alexander is making only $30 million guaranteed. So Jaire Alexander has the highest per year average, but is getting literally half as much guaranteed money, less than half as much guaranteed money as Denzel Ward. And I should say Denzel Ward and Jalen Ramsey are almost identical contracts, 5 years, $100 million, $20 million a year, $71 million total guaranteed. You can almost, there's slight variations, but those two are essentially the same market value. So does Jaylon Johnson want to be the highest in per year average? Is it important for him to say, okay, I'm at $22 million a year instead of 21 and 20? Or is it important for Jaylon Johnson to say, well, the per year average isn't as important. I need as much guaranteed money as possible. Let me get to $75 million guaranteed and be the highest paid cornerback in terms of guaranteed money, but maybe that ends up only being $20 million a year. So he's not number one in per year average, but he's number one in guaranteed money. Like those are the kind of figures that make this negotiation process a little bit more tricky because Ryan Poles obviously A, wants to spend as little as he can, but also like B, wants to navigate that guaranteed money to give himself the kind of financial flexibility with the contract. The more guaranteed money, the less flexibility you have as a team. But if the player is more intrigued by the total per year average than the guarantee, and you can keep the guarantees down, then that gives you more flexibility as a general manager to say, okay, a couple years into the contract, if this doesn't work out, I could get out of it a lot easier if the guaranteed money's low, as opposed to when the guaranteed money's high and you feel like you're kind of locked in with the little money that is guaranteed. I mean, that's why they call it that, to the player. And so that's what complicates this whole idea of like highest paid player in the NFL. But beyond that, you have other questions about Jaylen Johnson in this process of like, okay, no doubt, no one is questioning how good Jaylon Johnson was this season. I think we can all universally agree, whether you put him at number 1 or number 3 or whatever, but he had an elite year. You know, he was one of, if not the top cornerbacks in the NFL. That's a fairly universal evaluation of Jaylon Johnson. So now he's done that for 1 year. And I don't want to take anything away from that 1 year, but it is only 1 year of elite production. And we had the first 3 years of good and getting better production, but we know it was also, 1 interception over the first 3 seasons, gets 4 this past season and is great. Again, I'm not trying to detract from this year, but it's a question of, do you pay a guy the highest paid cornerback salary for 1 good year after 3 solid years? Or do you need to see another great year in order to really feel comfortable giving him a 4 or 5 year deal as the highest paid cornerback in the NFL? Like, I think this season, certainly like there's a certain number the Bears are willing to pay him right now, right? It's not a question of, is he worth more? He's definitely worth a big contract. Is he worth the biggest, literally the biggest contract after 1 really, really, really good year? And that answer may very well be yes, but it's still part of the question, especially when you talk about the one thing that Jaylon Johnson doesn't talk about in his quote there on the Keyshawn Johnson podcast, All Facts, No Breaks, where he says, "Oh, I've done everything. I made it all pro. I got Pro Bowl." I mean, the quote was, what else is there for me to get? Well, the one thing that is sort of left there is the durability question. And again, I'm not to say that this means you shouldn't pay him the contract, but it is part of this evaluation. If you're Ryan Poles, it's 2 things. It's, okay, you've done it for 1 really good year, but that is only 1 year of proof. And also every year you've missed a handful of games every season. And so does that make him still worth the literal top contract of any cornerback in the NFL? Or does that give Ryan Poles pause and say, man, I would pay you a couple more if you have done this for multiple years, but after just 1 year, I'm not quite ready to make you the highest paid guy. I mean, that's where the Bears start nitpicking in these negotiations, right? If you're trying to save a few $1 million here, you tell Jaylon Johnson, listen, you haven't stayed healthy for a full season, And you did this for one great year. So, like, can we bring you down a little bit on the price? Because it has only been one great year. Whereas, like, Jalen Ramsey got his 5-year, $100 million contract after he was already far and away the best cornerback in football. I mean, he was at the top of his game, a proven surefire commodity at cornerback that had done it for multiple years. Jaylen Johnson looked the part this year, absolutely, but has only done it 1 year. Like, if I'm taking Ryan Poles' position, that's the argument there. And I can see where if Jaylen Johnson wants that record-setting contract, and the Bears might push back on that a little bit, and the two sides have already had, I wouldn't say like, a deteriorated relationship, but obviously negotiations are tense, and not everybody's going to get what they want, and there's been some disagreement there for sure in the requested trade. Like, it's not like they're lockstep, arm in arm, having great negotiations up to this point. So does that leave the Bears saying, all right, listen, we heard Ryan Poles this offseason say already that his exact quote was, Jalen's not going anywhere. Here it is again from the season-ending press conference.
Ryan, what are your next steps in re-engaging with Jaylon Johnson's camp as far as negotiations?
Yeah, we have really good communication. The big thing was just kind of take a break here after the season, and then we'll start talks again. I feel really good about that situation. Jalen's not going to go anywhere, and we'll work through to get something done.
So there's no question Ryan Poles and the Bears want Jaylen Johnson around. But if there's still this perhaps a difference in valuation, does that not portend to the franchise tag, at least as a way of extending the negotiations, right? Because right now you have to sign him to a contract before free agency or else he can go in free agency. So you give him a franchise tag so that he is under contract through free agency, and then you can negotiate a contract up until, I don't remember if it's mid-June or mid-July, until the summer. You have to keep negotiating that contract situation and just give yourself more time, or at the very least, you lock him in on a 1-year deal on the franchise tag that ensures he's around for another season, that he could then play out on that season and maybe have another great season and stay healthy. And then boom, all of a sudden he's really proven it for back-to-back seasons. And you can go forward with even more confidence to say, all right, highest paid cornerback, no doubt, you're our guy. Let's lock it up long-term. Like, I'm not saying that's what the Bears should do, but that's what's in Ryan Poles' back pocket here as an option as they go through the negotiating process here. But then what, right? So franchise tag, Jalen's not going to be happy about it, but he's kind of admitted that, yeah, I see that's a real possibility here, and I can't control that. But then what? Then do they negotiate? Then if negotiations go south, is there still the possibility of a trade? And like, the Bears do have 3 young cornerbacks on this team in Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon, and Terrell Smith, who could fill those starting roles. I mean, not nearly as good as Jaylen Johnson, but more so to say they do have a quote-unquote backup plan or an alternative in place. And Jaylen Johnson could probably get you something pretty big in a trade haul as well. We'll kind of look at what some of those futures look like. And I want to dive into this durability question a little bit more too, because one of the things we overlook when we say, well, Jaylen Johnson's been hurt every year, is that most players get hurt every year, including the other top cornerbacks who have been paid. We'll go through some of those factors and some potential paths from here next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move you can make that'll take your business to the next level in 2024? Well, LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with, and that's why they created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals that makes it the best place to hire. When you have that many qualified candidates, it's so much easier. It's why LinkedIn Jobs is rated #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing a lot of different hats, and you might not have the time or resources to focus on hiring, so they make the process intuitive, quick, and easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I used Gametime to get tickets to multiple Bears games this season. I got a great deal on my tickets. I could see my view from my seat before I bought those tickets, and the whole transaction process was super easy. I love the app itself. It's just really easy to navigate and also discover events in your area as well, because it's not just Bears games, but it's any kind of live event at any kind of venue. Concerts, theater shows, comedy, you name it, they have it at Gametime. And they have a lowest price guarantee along with event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So the Chicago Bears are likely, I think, to franchise tag Jaylon Johnson. If they can reach a long-term deal, that'd be great, but history over these negotiations have said this has not been like smooth, quick, easy, get stuff done, right? It's been contentious and troublesome, and the franchise tag seems like the natural sort of path or the next step in that deal, and then they can continue to negotiate a trade. But I can't help but think about, like, okay, then what happens next? Then it's negotiating again, and you get up to the summer deadline, and then do you get a deal done? Would Jaylon Johnson be willing to play on the franchise tag this season? Or does he say, no, I'm not going to put my body on the line this year. I'm going to hold out, demand a trade, etc., whatever it might be, in order to get his long-term contract negotiation figured out. And then it's like, okay, well, what could you get in a trade for Jaylon Johnson? What were the offers at the trade deadline this past season that the Bears said no to? And did Jaylon Johnson finishing the rest of the season really strong increase not only his contract value, but also his potential trade value? I mean, certainly you could see other teams seeing a top flight cornerback available and thinking like, yeah, let's go get that guy, in the same way that the Bears traded for Montez Sweat and then gave him a deal. A team might be happy to give Jaylon Johnson a deal and give up some draft capital for Jaylon Johnson. Now, obviously, because that team has to trade for him and sign him, you're not going to get 2 first-round picks for Jaylon Johnson, I wouldn't think. I know that's what who traded Jalen Ramsey and got that. I forget which side of which Jalen Ramsey trade that ended up being. Was it to the Dolphins or was it to the Rams? They gave up 2 first-round picks to get Jalen Ramsey before he got his contract, but wasn't a franchise tag situation and was a very different sort of situation. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that to me seems like the high end of a potential Jaylen Johnson trade, kind of what they got for Jalen Ramsey. I think as we talked about earlier, Ramsey was a little bit more proven and a little bit more of a, repeated track record of success up to that point. So I don't think the valuation would be quite the same, but you never know. And then, another one to look at was when Marcus Peters was traded to the Rams from the Chiefs for a 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick. And then I think they ended up, I don't know if they think they then gave him a big contract after that. He had been a 3-time All-Pro corner at that time. A little bit older, obviously, than where Jaylon Johnson is at this point. But okay, we've seen high-quality cornerbacks in need of contracts get traded for, at the very least, a couple of day 2 draft picks, if not first-round picks. And if you look at the Bears and say, well, Tyreek Stevenson's one of your starters, and maybe Kyler Gordon is either another starter on the outside or your slot, and you like Terrell Smith, or you feel like there's good cornerbacks in this draft, there might be cornerbacks in free agency, and you might be able to use some of that draft capital you get for trading Jaylon Johnson to also upgrade the cornerback position and save yourself $20 million a year in the meantime on a guy that maybe Ryan Poles isn't 100% sold. Like, yes, he said Jalen's not going anywhere. You say that now, and to me that means we're either going to franchise tag or extend him. But if negotiations break down, does that stance change? Does Jaylon Johnson all of a sudden become available and potentially go somewhere? I think Ryan Poles is saying we're not going to let Jaylon Johnson walk in free agency. That's for damn sure. But from there, they fully intend to sign into a contract extension. But if that doesn't break, if that breaks down, if it doesn't pan out, well, then what? And that's kind of the big thing that I'm left thinking here is like, yeah, do the Bears have some leverage if they feel like we like Stevenson and we like Gordon and we like Terrell Smith and we like some of the other options to where we could add at cornerback this year? And as great as Jaylon Johnson was, we don't want to pay $22 million a year or $75 million guaranteed for a guy who has been injured and has only done it for 1 year. The one thing I'll say about the injury situation there with Jaylon Johnson is that, when you really take a step back and think about it, like, yes, players get hurt all the time and every year, and you're hard-pressed to find a cornerback who plays all 17 games every single season. Honestly, Jalen Ramsey was that for most of his career. He missed a couple of games in 2019, and then certainly this past season with the Dolphins, he was coming off the injury, of course, but like he has been the guy who's been healthy every year, and that's part of why his value was so sky high. But we talk about Denzel Ward being the highest in guaranteed money. He's never played a full season in his career. 13 games, 12 games, 12 games, 15 games, 14 games, 13 games. Like Denzel Ward has played about as many games per year as Jaylon Johnson. And Denzel Ward got 5 years, $20 million a year with $72 million guaranteed. So like that's right. That's Jaylon Johnson's leverage right there. Or you can look at Jair Alexander in Green Bay. 13 games, 16 games, 15, 4, 16, 7. Like he's had more full seasons, but also more lost seasons. And Jaylon has only ever had miss 5 or 6 games here and there, not miss 12 games, miss 13 games, miss 10 games. So he's been just as healthy as Denzel Ward, and Jair Alexander has had his ups and downs and injuries too. So like all these guys get hurt. So I would think if I'm Ryan Poles, like it's purely a what's my faith in Jaylen Johnson to be able to contribute at this maximum level for as long as possible. And I think ultimately this season he's shown enough of that yeah, as long as the guaranteed stuff is structured in a relatively team-friendly way, I'm giving Jaylen Johnson the big contract. You don't just let good players leave, because whatever player you try and replace Jaylen Johnson with, you're always just hoping that he becomes as good as a Jaylon Johnson. So when you have the player who's already good and is still young and wants to be here, and by all accounts is a positive influence in the locker room and obviously a really good player on the field, like there's not really any reason to lose Jaylon Johnson over negotiating a couple $1 million here and there. Like it's clear that the Bears see him like he's going to get paid a lot. And if the Bears are saying, man, we don't want to pay you over 18 and Jaylon wants 20 or 21, are you going to let a player like that get traded for $3 million a year? Like I know you got to be smart and you can't be reckless spending and unwise with your money, and you want to do what's best for the team. But like if you're already close, just get a deal done with Jaylon Johnson. Like sure, I think they could in theory get by without him and use those assets to keep building the team. But like when you have a really good young player right there, you got to take the bird in the hand there and keep building out this roster and building around players like Jaylen Johnson, especially when they're young like this, as opposed to like older players who are expensive like Eddie Jackson and Cody Whitehair, who maybe are a different conversation about, okay, do you keep and pay him or do you want to save the money on those potential contracts? We'll certainly talk about the Bears salary cap situation and potential cuts and the free agents that may come back or may leave throughout the offseason here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Really appreciate you making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We'll be having some guests joining us in the next couple weeks here on the podcast to talk about everything going on with Fields and with this offensive coordinator search. We'll certainly go in depth on whenever they hire an offensive coordinator. We'll get some other perspectives here on the podcast throughout the offseason as well. So coming back for those. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.